My name is Neil Greenberg. I'm a psychiatrist. I served in the Royal Navy for just less than 24 years. I retired about 4 years ago. And I am a professor down at King's College London. And when I was in the military, I was running the military's mental health research program. So I'm actually really interested to hear what our 4 panel members have to say, because they will be able to give their practical and informed experience about this really important topic. So I'm the sideshow, so I will get on, and each of the panelists will have 5 minutes to introduce themselves. And in that time, I'm hoping you will think of some good questions in order to get the session flowing nicely. So the first of the panelists is Jamie Sanderson, who's an ex-Royal Marine, who is one of the co-founders of Rock to Recovery. Jamie.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, my name is Jamie Sanderson. I am a former Royal Marine. I served for 18 years. And 3 years ago, I was medically discharged with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, anxiety disorders, chronic fatigue, lower back injuries, and some hearing loss and tinnitus issues with my hearing. It's been a journey basically in the last 10 years for me, which I've since studied, and I've realized that journey actually began from the day I was born, and the accumulated stress that I've gone through in my entire life has all, it's been water in the glass that's all added to the glass filling by 2006 when I was in Afghanistan. That actually happened in Afghanistan when I look back and think about it. I was a sniper in the Royal Marines, and I'd been a sniper throughout my career from early on. And as a young, enthusiastic man, I'd got to do everything that you can imagine a sniper in the Royal Marines in a place like Afghanistan, the Sangin Valley specifically, would probably have to do. And I loved 99.9% of my career, or I thought I did, and then I had this 10-year period of illness. And the clinical routes to support, namely EMDR and CBT as a therapy option, which was supplied by the Royal Navy for Royal Marines, had little effect on me, and after 4 years of persisting, it got to a point where it was actually making things worse. So my support there was brought to a close. They decided to end my career, and I had to go forward and help myself, basically. And that's where Rock to Recovery formed, when myself and Jason were going through the same thing at the same time, and were coaching each other. And we found that there was a little bit more to the support network that's out there beyond the offices of the doctor's surgery and the psychiatry. And we found that there's 2 things to finish on: that you need to be getting help, and that help needs to work. If it's not working, it's time to find something that does. And the other side that we realize is that you actually need to be helping yourself. And we find that in the mental health world, almost entirely, I believe, is my personal belief, it's kind of a neglected area. And Rock to Recovery was set up when we recognized that there was a whole motivational, inspiring, refocusing process that we could apply to the guys that we knew and we worked with and were friends, to their recovery, that actually involved 3 specific disciplines that were great for brain recovery, which was music, mountains, and water. And we'd naturally fallen into that category ourselves without even realizing it. And we help people in a coaching format get engaged with that kind of activity and refocus and reset goals and re-engage with life. Thank you.
Great. Thank you ever so much. And our next panelist is Jason Fox, also known as Foxy, for obvious reasons, who's also the other, it's not just the beard, I promise you, who's also the other co-founder of Rock to Recovery. Foxy.
Yeah, hi, obviously Jason Fox, again, co-founder, which has already been mentioned. My journey, again, like Jamie, started when I was actually born, but I didn't realise that at the time. Yeah, I joined the Marines when I was 16 years old. I served for 10 years with the Royal Marines. it was quite uneventful. After that 10-year period, I decided to do Special Forces selection, which I successfully passed, and it was around the time that the world itself changed in our stance on what was dangerous to us as a Western civilization, and 9/11. And that's when my world changed. I went into a very high-tempo job within the Special Forces. I was a member of a squadron for 10 years, going on multiple long tours of Iraq and Afghanistan. Actually, the main bulk of it was 5 tours of Afghanistan. In that time, I was involved, as you can imagine, in all sorts of high-tempo war-fighting operations that Special Forces get involved with. Now, just to go back a little bit, I was probably one of the biggest non-believers in PTSD or mental health issues in soldiers, and I'd openly debunk it and sort of make reference to the fact that I've listened to people talk about their experiences, but I'd been through the same experiences and not suffered with anything, or I hadn't really realised that I could be suffering with something, and I sort of turned a blind eye. Anyway, what happened, I had a briefing one year, paid little attention to it, and it was about what I should be looking for in my men as a commander, and moved on. And then about 2 years after that, I'm eating a huge slice of humble pie because I've got another tour of Afghanistan looming in the distance, which seemed like a black cloud to me, and I wasn't looking forward to it, that in itself was alien, because I had always enjoyed what I did. I like to think I was professional. But I enjoyed it, and I was somewhat of a perfectionist, and this was an alien emotion for me to be experiencing. So I acknowledged it. I didn't address it, I just acknowledged it and tried to push it to the back of my mind. I then went on a little bit further, saw that there were new guys, my own men, looking up to me for inspiration, looking at me to be a ball of fire, and I was having to dig deep to just find it in myself, let alone exude it to those people. And that's when I sort of started to take note, and I decided that I'd have to address this situation by going to what we call sick bay and sort of talking informally, which is what I did. I wanted it to remain informal. I was very embarrassed about this feeling, the fact that I could be contracting what everyone called PTSD. So I engaged. Nothing worked for me at that level, probably because I wasn't ready for it to, and also because maybe the personalities I was coming into contact with were people I didn't want to engage with, and I ended up getting discharged. Left, went through a series of different emotions, some of them contemplating suicide, and it was those emotions that actually made me do what I needed to do to get better, and that was actually, for me, was to be honest with myself, be honest about who I am, what I need as a human individually, and to acknowledge that and then move forward. And obviously, whilst this was going on, as Jamie's already alluded to, we had not formed Rock to Recovery by this stage. It was just an ideology. It was our idea, and it's how we helped each other. Obviously, there was other people involved. Some of them are in the audience, and there's other people that weren't involved. But for me, it was about being honest with myself and then understanding who I was so I could then move forward. And yeah, that's basically my story. There's a lot of things that have happened since. I've done projects that are things that I can get my teeth into and refocus myself. I need to be a busy person, and that's what and I just want to be happy. So essentially, Rock to Recovery is what helped me out.
Thank you very much indeed, Foxy, for that. Our next panellist is Matthew Green, who is an acclaimed author, and he's actually got copies of his book Aftershock here, which are available afterwards. He will sign them for you, and they're half price. I don't get any commission, he's told me, but I would strongly suggest you go and have a look at the book. Matthew.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Neil. I'm obviously not a veteran. I'm a journalist. But I have spent some time with the forces in Iraq, with US Marines during the invasion, and I was embedded with troops in Afghanistan. So I was able to observe some of the pressures that soldiers face on the ground. But I've also had a very long-standing interest in therapy and the mind. And writing this book gave me an opportunity to bring those two worlds together. I was actually working as a journalist in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but I moved back in 2013 to work on the book. And I suppose I set out to answer a simple question, really. What is psychological injury? What happens to cause people to suffer these long-term post-traumatic reactions? And also, what is the best way that we can help people and support them to make the best possible recovery? So in search of answers, I travelled all over Britain, meeting many veterans, including Jamie, who was one of the first people I met, and we had a long chat in your living room, and that story appears in chapter 4 of the book, actually. But the journey very quickly actually led me to Scotland, which wasn't planned, but it was how things unfolded, and particularly to a small town which many of you may know called Blairgowrie, where I got to know the story of a young soldier named Aaron Black, who came from a tough background and joined up, I think, looking for a new family, like so many people joining the forces. He served in Afghanistan in 2009 during a very tough tour with the Black Watch, and then came back and struggled. He did reach out for help, but his story didn't have such a positive ending as some of the others who've struggled in the same way. And his story forms, in a way, the backbone of the book. And I visited young veterans in Dumfries, in Kirkcaldy, in Stirling, and other cities across Scotland. And I saw, I think, the real life or death stakes that are involved in this question. But I also saw some of the most inspiring work, actually, that I think is being done anywhere in the country. In the last chapter of Aftershock, I write about NHS Tayside, where they're pioneering new approaches to trauma, which, again, we've heard about EMDR, we've heard about CBT, which obviously work for a lot of people, but they don't work for everyone. And I think, as a journalist, one of the most positive contributions I can make is to shine a spotlight on some of these new frontiers in therapy, which are, in my opinion, perhaps very promising. Obviously, this can be a very dark topic. We know that many people have gone for many years of suffering as a result of suffering psychological injury while on operations or even beforehand. But I'd like to think that by gathering these stories and by putting them into a book, we can almost redeem some of that suffering and find answers. Because if there's one thing that the 2 years I spent researching the book taught me, it's that we talk about veterans, but actually we're talking about individuals. And we're, above all, talking about human beings. And I think that the rest of us have an enormous amount to learn from people like Foxy, Jamie, and many others who've been on these incredible journeys, which have had very dark points in them, but also some real epiphanies and moments of transformation. And you know, it's obviously insane to solve any problem through warfare, and the solution to post-traumatic stress disorder in the military is to not fight. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But in the meantime, I'd like to think that by listening to these stories, we might find new ways of healing that the rest of society can also benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. And just one more advert that his book is available afterwards for half price. And our last speaker is Simon Lee, who is a co-founder of a charity called PTSD 999. And Simon.
Thank you very much. Well, it's lovely to be here. It's like being on holiday. It's great. It's been a great couple of days. My name's Simon Durrant. I'm a former soldier, and I've been suffering from post-traumatic stress for over 20 years. I came from quite a rough background, and I was homeless at 14, and living on the sort of streets of London, which had its good points, believe it or not. It was good to get away from my parents. I joined the military, as most of you do. I think we're, as sort of mentioned before, with these guys, you know, you're looking for a family, you're looking for somewhere to go, and it was probably going to be either the military or sort of prison for me. So I joined and I served, and that's when my sort of post-traumatic stress came from. I came out of the military, and I struggled. I tried to take my life, and I was very, very lucky that didn't happen, and somebody got me and saved me. And I struggle, and I still struggle now, sort of every day, whether it's sort of going out down the shops or it's coming to work or whatever it's doing. I have to really fight to open that door, walk out into that street, and crack on. But I sort of kept it very sort of secret and quiet, and I'd get aggressive, I'd get angry, I'd drink too much. I still drink too much, still eat too much. So it's, so that was sort of my life for, a considerable amount of time. A lot of my soldiers went on to become policemen, firemen, ambulance staff, and things like that. And one chap in particular who's here, which you'll meet later, who is the other co-founder of PTSD 999. It's a crap name, but it is what it is. It says what it is on the tin. Very simple. And you can meet him and have a little chat with him. He lost his job. He's a former soldier and served as a police officer. And he lost his job to post-traumatic stress. And it completely destroyed his home life. And that was due to serving on the 7/7 bombings, in the mortuary on the 7/7 bombings, April Jones cases, quite difficult child abuse cases and so on and so forth. And he won't mind me telling you, he was also sort of abused as a kid when he was younger. So there's a lot sort of going on there. And he lost his job. And we were talking about it. We went through the whole court case and all the whole nonsense and the very, very difficult situation. And he was like, boss, there's a complete lack of care within the service, and soldiers, police officers, always moaning about something. There's always something to complain. Never not enough money, never the right equipment, never this, that, and the other. They're always moaning about something. I said, really? Really? He said, yeah, no, it's true. So we sort of went into it, we looked at it, and it was abundantly clear that there is a complete lack of care within the emergency services. So we set up this charity, PTSD 999, and it deals solely with emergency services. So serving emergency services and retired. And we included family and friends in that as well, because it really does hit the wives, the husbands, the girlfriends, the boyfriends, kids, and everybody else that goes along with that. So we set that up about a year ago, and it was hugely important that we didn't want a signpost. Bloody hate it. There's nothing worse than somebody who's really, really struggling. They're on their arse, and they see an organisation, and they open the door, and they walk through, and straight away, oh, you're going to send me to the Samaritans. You're going to send me to this. You're going to send me to... Nothing wrong with the Samaritans. They do great work. But sometimes, you know all that's there. You want something that you can identify with and something that you can trust. So there's a huge lack of trust, again, within the emergency services on what they offer and what they give you. So we wanted to do something that was completely separate. So anybody that calls us up, they speak to somebody who's either suffered or done the job. We get a lot of guys and girls that call up, and there's just silence at the end of the telephone. And I'll say, look, hello, my name's Simon. I used to be in the army. I've suffered post-traumatic stress for 20-odd years. I said, I'm having a good day today. How are you doing? And you can almost hear this weight off their shoulders. And then they start to open up and they start to talk, which is great. And then we get them diagnosed. So they see the same sort of person. So we get them diagnosed. And then from that diagnosis, we can have a look at them and say, it could be CBT, EMDR, it could be something else. It could be something swimming with dogs. It could be shaving a French girl's armpits every Thursday, every other week. And if that is the case, and if that's what's saving you, that's what I'm going through treatment for at the moment. Amongst other things, very good. Very expensive. But if it is that sort of thing, and by God, we'll do it. So our approach is we put our hand on the head of the individual and we work back. We've lost a few people that have killed themselves. We've had a fireman who couldn't cope, and sort of jaws of life they call them, that cut roofs off cars and things like that. He put them around his head and cut his head off. We've had traffic police officers that have hung themselves. And we've had a young ambulance girl, very tragic actually. We had a great chat with her on the telephone, and I thought, right, we're making progress here. And it might have been she spoke to me, it's probably not a good thing. And she spoke to me and she said, Simon, that's really good. She said, I've never felt so wonderful, in years, in 12 years. I said, oh, that's fantastic, that's great news. She said, but I'm going to kill myself. I was like, whoa, hang on, no, where are you, what are you doing now? No, I know what you're going to say, don't want to hear it. You've really made me feel really, really good. I'm thinking, Christ, well, obviously not that good. And the young girl, she did, a few weeks later, took a big overdose, and that was it. She couldn't cope anymore. And I can't deal with that. I don't want to lose anybody because there's some amazing people out there. And so, we do what we do. We're sort of funded, by the individuals that work for us, and charitable donations, things like that, and so on and so forth. But we try and do it with a bit of humour. because mental health it is so depressing. It's terrible, isn't it? And nobody ever wants to talk about what's going on up in here. And you see these boys here that have been, on all the lovely holiday hotspots over the last few years, getting their hands dirty, keeping us safe, doing what they do, and working their magic there. And there's no visible scars on them when they come back. They've not lost arms and legs. And that's tough enough, isn't it? But it's for the public, they can see that. But for us that are suffering, it's what's going on here, and you don't want to talk about it. You feel embarrassed, you feel ashamed to talk about it. So it's hugely, hugely important that we discuss this, and it's great that you're all here talking about it. And I'll shut up now because I've probably done about 10 minutes. I'm sorry.
You've done great. Thank you ever so much. Well, I think you've heard 4 very compelling, somewhat similar in some ways and somewhat very different stories. What I'm hoping is that you've got some good questions that you want to ask the panel, because I know they want to answer them for you. When you do want to ask a question, if I could ask you to put your hand up, then I can tell you that one of the staff will come round with a roving microphone, which we need to get to you before you ask the question, so that we can record what you're asking, and then the panel can give their responses. Now, before you ask your first question, as chair, I get the privilege of doing that myself. So I'm going to throw the floor open with a question which really relates to the last point that you made, Simon, which is about this idea of stigma. And as you quite rightly said, there is a reticence for people to come forward and to ask for help. And I wonder what the panel's view is of what the main reasons for that is, and also how that might have changed over time.
Yes. Was that directed at me, or was that open to the...
Why not? Let's start with you.
Oh, no. Great. Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is changing. I think, we have to do more. You think about shell shock, PTSD, the name's always changing, this, that, and the other. Life is complicated enough, particularly if you're married to my wife. Life is complicated enough. Wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, kids, paying the mortgage, paying the car payment, all the normal stuff that you have to do and you have to fight. It's a nightmare. And if you have to struggle, say if you're a police officer, you're going to work, Monday morning, you're dealing with a paedophile case, you're dealing with Tuesday road traffic accident, Wednesday you're hacksawing somebody who's committed suicide on the train, you're hacksawing their bodies off the front of a train, and come Friday comes, you've got to get home. You're not going to open up, you're not going to talk about, some of the issues and things that you had. Getting yourselves to open up and be more honest and talk to your wife, talk to your partners, I think is hugely, hugely important. I think it's getting better, but I think, particularly with, tough guys here, clearly not as good looking as me, but, these guys, with their profile, raising their profiles and so on and so forth, if you look at these guys, you think, right, these guys are being open and talking about their problems, and they're top drawer guys, hopefully that will, help, some of the others to open up, I would have said.
Thanks very much. Anyone?
I mean, stigma's been the biggest issue for mental health, full stop. And it's one of the reasons why, like I said earlier, I lied about it. People asked me why I was leaving the military, and anyone that wasn't in the know thought I was leaving because of hearing loss or tinnitus, which I made it, well, no, I've got a little bit, but I essentially made it worse than it was. And then after a while, after we started talking about it, and me and Jamie sort of came out, so to speak, about our mental health issues and where we were at a certain... That wasn't supposed to be a joke, by the way, but anyway, I'll take it. Anyway, moving
swiftly
on. Swiftly on.
Yeah.
Stigma.
Stigma.
Yeah, so we suddenly realised that actually where we were in our career as senior NCOs in the Royal Marines and Special Forces, that if we started to talk about it, maybe we could start breaking down that stigma, because we realised that to talk about it actually helps you. It helped us. It makes you become more honest with yourself. It makes you look at who you are, and you can then move forward and become actually a more rounded person from actually going through that experience, because you understand who you are. You understand what affects you and what doesn't affect you, how you manage it going forward. So, yeah, it's about breaking down the stigma. We've used lots of different platforms, social media, TV, to try and get it out there and try and make it less of a sort of stigma. and try and make it more of a normal thing, because it essentially is just a normal reaction to some abnormal things that are going on in and around people's lives. So,
So one of the things I noticed, and I still work with now, is in a professional capacity, stigma can mean different things, and a big one for military guys, particularly still serving, and I'm sure it's the same with the ambulance, fire brigade, police force, etc., is that by going forward and putting your hand up, if you like, there's a chance you could lose your job. And that creates, and depending on how each department manages that professionally, that potentially could lead to loss of income, families suffering, and I know a lot of clients that will come to my office, for example, and say, I've got this problem, but I can't go to the doctors about it. So that, I'll pick them up and physically take them to the doctors. In some cases, that's happened, but there is so from an employer's point of view and a patient's point of view, I guess, there is this concern about losing the job. I think that fits in with stigma.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to?
Just very briefly, when I was writing the book, I interviewed Surgeon Captain John Sharpley, who's the Chief Psychiatric Advisor for the whole of the military. And he said 90% of people who may have problems don't come forward. We get the tip of the iceberg. And obviously, that has to change if we're going to get people the help they need earlier so that they can recover quicker rather than going on these years and years of struggling. And I think, obviously, the kind of example that you're setting is incredible. But also, we do need to see senior serving officers, I think, come forward, because I think that's something that is missing at the moment. There's increasingly, we're seeing sergeants or other ranks coming forward, but we need to see high up brigadiers, generals saying, yeah, I had a period of alcoholism or anxiety or depression or trauma. It didn't affect my career, and it kept me I'm still on the rails. And I think setting that example would make a real impact.
Just, I realise it's answering my own question, but worth commenting. So in the Canadian forces, I don't know if you know, there was a general called General Dallaire, who was a brigadier in Rwanda, where Canadian troops came across some very difficult situations, and he actually got post-traumatic stress disorder. He went off, he got treatment, and he got promoted to a major general, to a 2-star general. And he made it his personal mission, like many of you, to do something about it. And in the research that we've done, we've actually found, and this is not statistically significant, but that the Canadian forces have a better approach to coming forward than probably the Australians, the British, and other forces. And one wonders whether, exactly as you say, having someone senior say, listen, I'm a 2-star, if I can have problems, so can you, is a positive message. So thank you for that. Please.
Can I add one thing? And it's relevant to the TV series that Jason was on. So in Series 1, I've probably never even said this to you yet, but in Series 1, when you came out on TV...
That joke's done. Joke's done.
Trying to keep it going a bit. There was a point where there was a very intimate piece to camera, and he talked about his own issues. And even in my house, the room, the atmospheres went... So arguably, if the toughest guy on TV at the time, arguably, can openly talk and bust a stigma out loud, there's a message in that, and you probably don't know this yet, but what happened in the next 10, 15, 20 minutes is my phone went crazy with people putting their hand up. And I was up till about midnight, so you owe me one. But sorry, dude. But yeah, I've seen the effects of that stigma bust happen, so it's very important.
Thank you ever so much for that. So now over to you. So if anyone does have questions, excuse me, the lights are in my eyes, please do put your hand up, and someone will come to you with a microphone. Have a taker over here. I think the microphone is coming. It will get there, I promise you.
Hello there. I am an occupational health consultant, and I advise business about rehabilitation of individuals who are off sick or have long-term health issues or even short-term health issues. And I've just come across a case a very sad case where an individual has admitted he has an army background, but is at the beginning, I think, of that journey in terms of the PTSD. Unfortunately, and I think this is maybe quite widespread, you can imagine mental health and business, we're trying to bring down the stigma in there. Now add PTSD into that, and I am having challenges with this man's employers in terms of how they support him, because it's a small, medium enterprise business, and if he's not there, or if he's acting erratically, or there are issues there that are impacting on work, how do you move on? I mean, I have a great amount of concern for this individual because he probably will lose his job. And he's only at the start of where he is on that journey. I know it sounds very American, but how do you manage to turn around and look forward and take that person to be able to function? It's probably a huge question, sorry.
No, but I think it's a really important question, because it's a real life example of what does one practically do? What does the small and medium enterprise do? Over to you, Paul.
I mean, it is difficult because obviously a small, that sort of enterprise is reliant on its people being there to perform for them, to deliver output. But on the flip side to that, it's about also engaging with, there would be no business without people. People make up business, people make up units, organisations, the military, the police, everything. So you have to invest in them, and you have to be loyal to them for them to be loyal to you. And it is tough, I understand that, but it's a sort of long-term thing that will end up going in everyone's favour instead of just looking at the short-term solution of how to earn money really quickly. That's pretty much all I've got to say on that one.
I think there's two sides to it, and that is the client and the employer. There's two sides to coach here. If we were to, so our head of coaching sat in here, and I'm sure that because me and him work well together, me as a welfare officer, him as the coaching, so what we would do here, I'm fairly certain, and you can jump in if I'm. So I would want to work with them both. Initially with the man that's got the problem. The thing to get is the right help. So he needs to be getting help that's working. That's the really important thing. Clinical support, you've got the doctor's visits have got to be happening. You've got to eliminate the potential of any other illness, and it could just be presenting, say, in depression, and we think it's just depression, but it could be linked to something else, for example. So clinical support's got to be there. Good advice and an introduction to different methods and find the one that works for him. But then I would want to work with his employer as well and talk to them, and then potentially work with them both and do some sort of return to work program. But I know not everyone's as sympathetic as me, so I get that.
I mean, yeah. I think on a wider note, certainly we in the media have a responsibility as well to make sure we portray the symptoms of psychological injury in an accurate way, because it's very damaging for people to have misunderstandings or stereotypes about post-traumatic stress. I mean, it's clearly the case that someone suffering from PTSD is usually going to present much more danger to themselves than certainly to anyone else. But there's still these misunderstandings which can linger, particularly when the reporting is sensationalist in some way. And I mean, I think certainly from my engagement with this subject, I realize that it's probably not always helpful to always portray every member of the forces as a hero, but it's certainly not helpful to portray them as a victim either. And I think it's the professionalism of the armed forces that we need to be focusing really on in our coverage.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a real difficult one for you, and it's at all levels. I mean, we went into the Met Police a year ago, and we were there with, I won't mention who it was, but it was sort of senior people within there, and they said, before you carry on, I just want to tell you, we're not buying anything. It's like, what? I said, got everybody together. I said, look, can I be honest? I said, yeah. I'm going to swear here, so I'm sorry. I said, I'm not fucking selling anything.
Yeah.
You know, I said, you've just got a world of crap coming your way and you're ill-equipped to deal with it. And it goes back to your point. It's hugely important that you engage with the business and the individual, but it's really, really tough. You know, it's, you know, they want their individual to work. It's, you know, money's tight. And again, it's the same for the Met Police. But if you engage early, we looked at their figures, and you've got to make it financial. We looked at the Met Police's figures for everybody that got off sick with mental health, and we worked out, and that's long-term sick, and we worked out if we just saved 3 days in that year, we saved them £52 million and 208 days policing. So then they started to listen. So it's, you know, you think many, many years ago, you know, you'd never talk about being gay if you were in the military. You never talk about, you know, it was all kept very, very quiet. Now you can't go past an institution without a rainbow-coloured flag flying and everybody marching in the street with marching bands and everything else, which is great. And I think we're on that sort of turning point for mental health as well. We need to get that sort of motivation going.
Thank you all very much. I guess from my perspective, I'd also say that, of course, military and emergency services aren't the only people to suffer with PTSD. You know, it affects the civilian population. And I think any organisation, whether someone has PTSD or depression, unfortunately, mental health problems are a feature of everyone's lives. And really, that organisations can't pay no attention to it because there's a law, thankfully, that protects those affected in that way. So in some ways, being a veteran or not shouldn't really make a big impact, although I understand exactly that people may think it does. Thank you.
If you think we can help with that particular case, come and see us.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, we've got some here.
I just wondered, I just wondered how much the arts help in therapies for your particular work. I come from a military family, and it's quite interesting to hear what you say.
Shall I answer that one?
Yeah.
This is my department.
Over to you.
Hugely, I think is the answer. Yes, therapies, treatments, clinical, psychiatry, psychology, all that's there, and it's got to work. You know, it's got to be. But you've got to. So somebody suffering with mental health has got to be doing the help yourself bit, and that involves stimulating certain parts of the brain that are going to motivate you and get you out of bed in the morning. Okay, and what I mean by the science behind music, mountains, and water is that very thing. So when I say music, yeah, music's way up there on the list of priorities, but that it's creative. So it could mean art, photography, dancing, theatre, all that sort of stuff, acting. It's stimulating the creative part of the brain. So art is huge, and I've seen the impact of that. So I was in a rehab unit in Plymouth, where there's roughly around about 100 tri-service veterans. I lived there for a year. They introduced art, music, some of it off the back of what I was saying, because I learned to play the guitar when I was suffering really badly with depression. I realized it was the only thing I was really interested in helping me get going. And art was probably the next thing, the big thing that was having a massive impact on people. So it's all part of that, we believe, that help yourself thing to stimulate the creative and the positive side of your brain.
Thank you very much. Anyone else got a comment on that?
I just absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I sort of poo-pooed it to begin with, but we sort of got into it, and yeah, we've got guys. Two senior police officers and a senior fire officer off sort of doing their theatrical bit, which is great, and it's made a huge change, you know, to their lives. So it's absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. Any more questions? I think there was another one over here. Oh, got one at the back there. Yep, that's great. Nearly. We'll come to you next.
Testing. There we go. I'm wondering what kind of barriers you've found in relation to seeking treatment. There's obviously been discussion about the most difficult thing is to actually seek it, but I'm just wondering about barriers after that. And some of my own experiences are, first of all, touched upon, which is every organisation you go to is a bloody signposting organisation. Go round and round in circles until you end up with one which drinks coffee, and that's about it. And the second one is other barriers have been put up. I don't know about your own experience, but people that are suffering with with PTSD, about, I'd say maybe 80 or 90% smoke. Now, I don't know if you've been down to Combat Stress in Holybush House, but a lot of people I know don't go back there anymore because they make you walk to the end of the driveway. You can't even smoke outside the building anymore. Another massive barrier to actually getting any treatment there for that. So I'm interested to know what other barriers that you've found, perhaps in your own personal journey, in getting to perhaps some sort of sensible end state.
Thank you.
I don't know, I think my main barrier was me, to be honest. But then I think it's not, a barrier is yourself, because I think a lot of the time people get downhearted and despondent when they don't find something that works, when they walk into, say, like you said, another signposting organisation, or you can't do this or you can't do that. The fact of the matter is you're probably not going to fix it straight away. You're not going to walk into the first thing, you're not going to walk into the first room and it's going to be solved straight away. And it's to be aware of that and be emotionally aware of that and try and somehow manage that in yourself. It's not easy, I know it isn't, because I've been there and I've done it. But I've got the luxury of hindsight, which everyone, you know, whatever, but it is that, and that's why we talk about it. That's why I talk about it. I try and teach people that to be emotionally aware of where you're going to be at when you walk through those doors, and that it might not work actually prepares you to deal with it in a better way. So for me, the barriers were essentially put up by myself. I created the barriers, and I was the one that was almost willing myself to fail. The help is out there. It's just that you're not going to find it straight away.
Simon, I wonder if you got any comments?
Yeah, I guess, you know, for us, it's the guys and girls, fear of losing the jobs. You know, fear of the job finding out is the big one. Yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest driver, and then it would become family. You know, my husband doesn't know about it, or I can't tell my wife. Kids don't know; they don't know. So I would say those two for us.
Okay, thank you very much. I've definitely seen there's definitely more hands. There's a hand back up the top there.
Hi, like the second two panellists, I'm also a former Royal Marine, and I'm probably the oldest person in the room. And so my service goes back to the Falklands right through Iraq and Afghanistan. But after the Falklands, which was a fairly brief and bloody affair, lasting about 6 weeks ashore, I was part of the South Atlantic Medical Association, and I've kept an eye on the kind of issues that some of the guys who were on the island during that time suffered over the years. And there was a lot of people suffering some fairly nasty kind of mental health issues over a period of time. Two things that I'd be interested to find out what Neil thinks about, after 12 years of highly kinetic operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, what lies in terms of PTSD and psychological wounding just beyond the near horizon. And secondly, when I left the Royal Marines, I worked for 3 years delivering personal development and life skills in 3 high-security prisons in the southwest of England. And I was amazed and kind of anxious to see an increasing number of veterans coming into the system, and often with anger management issues, and in some cases fairly harrowing cases of PTSD as well. And so I'm just really interested to hear what the panel thinks about that particular issue, whereas in prisons there is a lot of mental health issues. So about 75% of the people inside are suffering from some degree of mental health issues, but about the increasing numbers of servicemen who are finding their way on the wrong side of the law, and also getting no support whatsoever with their PTSD and other kinds of kind of psychological wounding issues.
Thank you very much. Just in terms of the ticking time bomb, tsunami, whatever sort of adjectives that the Daily Mail would want to use, and I'd strongly advise you not to read the Daily Mail. I think it's fair to say that although we do this cohort study at King's College London, and we're just about to publish over the next few months the last set of data, so I can't go into it in detail, but in broad terms, it will not be surprising that if you've been fighting seriously kinetic operations for many years, that there will be an impact. But what I can say, that impact isn't a tsunami or any other similar sort of phrase. But unsurprisingly, if you send troops to war, you will have an impact. And that impact will mostly be seen in the veteran population, because if you have mental health problems, as you've heard, it's a risk factor for leaving service. But so there are problems out there, of course there are, but perhaps they're not quite the picture that the Daily Mail would say. But on the second part, would anyone like to come in on that?
I've just forgotten what it was.
The prison part,
Prison.
yeah.
Prison.
I think that it's obviously an interest of huge importance, and I went to visit a couple of prisons while I was researching. I went to HMP Doncaster and HMP Frankland, the maximum security prison near Durham, where I met a gentleman called Jimmy Johnson, and he'd been in jail for more than 30 years after serving in Northern Ireland in the early 70s. He came out, he suffered some sort of flashback reaction, committed a murder, went to jail, and then came out and more or less did exactly the same thing again. Now his case is being reviewed 30 years down the line. It's obviously way too late for him. But there are certainly a lot of other cases now of veterans who are much younger from Afghanistan who do have these anger issues, which may in some cases be related to PTSD, who are entering the criminal justice system. There are, though, also some initiatives which are coming online. There's various programs coming up across the country to have early intervention. So the police now are asked to actually, if they arrest someone, say, "Are you a veteran?" And if so, then there's somebody they can call who can maybe coordinate support and help that individual to access whatever charities or services might be available. So my feeling is that, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a problem, certainly. But the good news is there are increasingly initiatives to try to intervene at the very start of that criminal justice process and hopefully can fish these guys out of the system and get them the help they need before their lives really unravel.
Any other panelists got a comment on that? I think it's worth saying, perhaps, well, you think that in terms of looking at the data, that what the data shows is actually overall military personnel and veterans are less likely to commit offences than people who haven't served overall. But feeding into the question, is they're more likely to commit violent offences, particularly if they are suffering with PTSD or alcohol or substance misuse. And again, that's perhaps not surprising. So if we can treat the alcohol and the mental health problems properly, then actually we should reduce the risk that they will commit the sort of offences that will lead them into custody.
Yeah, and I will add that, so at times when I was extremely ill, depression, anger, everything was going wrong, and alcohol involved and things like that. In fact, probably not when the alcohol was involved, but the point I'm getting to is I still knew the difference between right and wrong. However, I can, in case by case, understand when the recklessness comes in and it's self-harm, really. So they then don't care what happens to them because of how they're feeling and how ill they are. But I personally, I had a control of what was right and what was wrong when things were at the worst. But it's always case by case and individual.
Thank you. I've definitely seen there's some more questions. It's more hands up. Thank you very much.
Hi, I work with predominantly males, male veterans, and one thing myself and my colleague have noticed that quite a lot of the males that we're working with never really had that opportunity when they were younger to talk about how they were feeling, and plus when they went through the sort of military, there was this man-up mentality. Just wondered what your opinions were on how important it is to kind of teach children about mental health and actually that it is something that everyone has and it could affect you. Just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I when I joined the military, it was, you know, the period we're at the moment is we're in this transition phase of going from, as a global culture, going from the old school mentality of just man up and shut up to the fact that kids nowadays, the youth, us, everyone is so much more informed and so much more, again, I'm going to use this word, emotionally aware. And, you know, people are starting to see the fallout from the conflicts that we've been involved with, and they hear about PTSD and they are like talking about it, and they hear veterans talking about it. And I think, I mean, I'm sure that our military's recruitment levels have probably dipped because of that, because, you know, educated young people are looking at the fallout from it and going, well, there's this thing called PTSD that we don't really know about, but it actually mucks people up psychologically to the point where they're either going to prison, killing themselves, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So I'm not going to do that. So as far as I'm aware, or my opinion is that we should actually, yes, it's really important that we start talking to people at a young age, whether it's in schools, whether it's in recruit training, where we sort of give them or explain to them certain tools that they can use in the future that for when they start feeling how we felt. They might not take any notice of it, but I'll tell you what, when they start feeling that later on in life, they'll probably start remembering it, or they'll at least try to revise it by talking to someone. And we're trying to, and again, we're normalizing it as well. So it becomes a normal thing. You teach someone something at a young age, it becomes a normal thing. So for me, I think it's extremely important that we start talking about it as early as we possibly can.
We had a lecture this morning that looked at the balance between childhood trauma and stress and adulthood trauma and stress, and how the continuity and accumulation and the separation and all the statistics behind all that. And I think it kind of led towards that's kind of got to happen, you know. I guess there's a fine balance between giving them too much information and just giving them enough, but that's not for us to decide. But I personally think that's a good thing as well.
Okay, great, thank you. I've seen there's some questions for people in the middle who obviously aren't near the microphone, so give the middle people a chance as well.
Yeah. Hi, how are you doing, guys? Thanks a lot for putting this on. It's really compelling. I'm just going to ask 2 questions, if that's okay. The first one should be reasonably brief. You talked about new therapeutic techniques. I think, Matthew, you said that there was some new stuff that was coming out. I was just wondering if you guys could maybe explain a little bit about that.
Okay, do you want to ask the second one? I'll write them down this time. So we've got new therapies, yep. And what's the second question?
I just wondered if you guys had any insights on, I mean, you said at the start, you said it's important that the person should be helping themselves. But I wondered if you had any insights on actually communicating that to somebody who was maybe struggling to get that idea, because obviously they're in a place where, I mean, it may be like difficult for them to like think about that traumatic event, or maybe they feel quite helpless. Like, I would never say that someone with PTSD is helpless, but I mean they certainly feel that way, some of them. So obviously asking them to get help is putting them in a position where they might feel more dependent. So I was wondering if you guys had any insights on communicating with somebody in that instance.
Okay, thank you. So just the first question first, some insights into new therapies. I wonder,
yeah, well,
Matthew.
This is a really exciting field, and across the board there's innovation taking place, whether it's virtual reality therapy in the US, there's a renaissance in research into psychedelic-assisted therapy using MDMA or other compounds to try to confront the trauma. But I think and I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who are therapists, and everyone knows that to get through a trauma, you have to confront it at some level, go back to that moment, resolve whatever the overwhelming terror or anger or shame is that you're still carrying, and move past it. And that's at the core of CBT or EMDR. But it's often very difficult. It's exhausting, certainly for the client, and it can also be extremely exhausting for the therapist who's doing the therapy. And what I found fascinating, particularly in Scotland, is I mentioned earlier NHS Tayside are pioneering a technique which really works to build up the resources of the client, to build up their kind of inner strength so that they're able to confront that trauma safely. The technique is called the comprehensive resource model, and it was pioneered by an American psychologist called Lisa Schwartz. And it draws partly on psychology, but it also draws on a whole range of Native American healing arts, shamanic style practices, breathing exercises, to really get the client rooted in their body. And one of the really fun parts of it is the use of a power animal. Now, this sounds like some kind of awful corporate away day exercise, where you get your kind of power penguin. It's actually not like that. You go, I mentioned confronting the trauma is the core of the work. And it's a bit like bomb disposal. You have to approach this kind of booby-trap device so carefully that you don't trigger it and the client starts to dissociate, and you can actually cause a lot of damage by doing that process clumsily. So a lot of the focus on this approach is on building up the resources, keeping the client embodied so they don't dissociate, and giving them the feeling of attachment, of not aloneness that they didn't have at the time of the trauma. And there was one particular former Special Forces soldier who I met who talked about doing this process. And at one point, the psychiatrist, Dr. Alistair Hull, said, okay, he took him into the sort of journey and said, right, we're going to look for what being, what animal, what creature could help you to confront your trauma. And at first nothing came. And he had a little think when he went home. He thought, well, dogs maybe? And he thought, well, dogs is Winston Churchill's black dog. That's not going to work. Viper, snake. If anyone needs to be meting out the aggression, it's me. I don't need an aggressive snake on my side. Dolphin, not really practical. Eagles, birds. Anyway, so he went back for the next session and they did the exercise again. And he went into this kind of journey and he met this beautiful, sleek, velvet-coated jaguar kind of stepped forward in his mind's eye. And the psychiatrist, Alistair, said, okay, I want you to go back to your worst trauma. And actually for him, he had a whole career in the Special Forces, but his worst trauma was being beaten as a 4-year-old by his father, who was an alcoholic. And he had this experience of revisiting that beating, but this animal was standing over him, and he could hear its heart beating, he could feel it breathing, he could see its paws, and it was utterly real in this kind of vision that he was having. And he was able to confront this trauma. Now, there's a lot of work that this team is doing to try to establish what's happening at the level of neurobiology. And the theory is that these power animals actually stimulate the neural pathways that are governing our sense of attachment, our sense of being cared for, our sense of being not alone, which is obviously a big part of trauma therapy. So, that sounds like a slightly mystical, far-out kind of idea, but I think we need to be looking at these kind of really radical new thinking if we're going to provide hope to the 50% plus people who just aren't getting better with our existing toolkit. So, and it's wonderful that some of this exciting work is taking place not very far from where we're sitting.
Great, thank you. You have.
Virtual reality. We are sort of trialing that out at the moment. So we use it in various different ways, but we use it in presentations. So if you don't know what PTSD is like, you can we put on a mask and we take you through everything, and we can sort of put, so it's quite active, so you can see it going on the screen behind you, everybody else. But the poor individual, they're getting smells, they're getting tastes, they get a real sort of feel for it. So we use it in that sphere, and we also use it. It's a bit like a sexy Skype, and the guys can talk. They can be anybody they want to be. They can be anywhere they want to be in the world, sitting down, having a natter, and going back to what we're sort of saying, that it's okay to talk, and it's okay to talk about mental health. And these guys can do it from anywhere in the world, anywhere in the UK, and talk about their experiences. And they could be sitting on a beach in Melbourne, or they could be, wherever it may be. So it's pretty cool.
Great. And I've got myself a fox. Which I find useful.
I'm glad you felt you could come out about that.
We need to get away.
Thank you very much. And so on to the second part of that question then was about how does one communicate with others when actually you want to just get on and sort it yourself?
I mean, that's quite difficult, though, because we're all individual, and the person that stood in front of the person that needs help will hopefully will understand. Maybe they won't, and that's the difficulty. It's got to be the right person that tries to communicate the fact that that individual needs help. I had an ex-wife banging on at me for years that I needed help, and I just point blank refused to listen to her. She was my wife. Why would I? But poor joke. It was a joke. It was a joke. No, but obviously it's, you know, the closest. Sometimes it's the closest people that see it. But when they try to communicate that, it doesn't work because there's too much going on in the background. There's, you know, a relationship is made up of highs and lows. And when someone's trying to highlight something that I saw as a embarrassing, debilitating thing that happened to me, I just remembered all the lows that were going on in our relationship. So I just kicked back and fought it. So there has to be tactful ways of doing it, and you need to try and sit back, not get angry at the individual that needs help, and think again, look, replan a sort of form of attack on how to help them help themselves. And sometimes it might mean that you have to use someone else to communicate that. There's always going to be lots of different subtle ways that you can get that person to open up, and unfortunately it's not easy, but it takes a little bit of thought from the individual that actually does care about that person. So there's no answer to that question, really, other than the person that stood in front of the person that needs help needs to sort of seriously consider how they approach and sort of tackle that. What is essentially the most important part of this whole issue is that initial engagement, the first engagement with the person that needs help. Because sometimes they can't see it, because half the time they're trying to bury their head in the sand and almost deny that they've got a problem. So it's, you know, you could literally scare them away really, really quickly. It happened to me. And that's why before you approach anyone, long, hard think about it. Even though you might think it needs addressing there and then, just seriously consider it, because that first point of contact is so important.
Thank you very much. I think one thing worth pointing out, because we're here in Scotland, is that Veterans First Point, is that the Scottish Veterans Service actually have pioneered the use of peers in order to make a really good front door. So instead of coming in to see a therapist, you come in to see somebody who's like yourself, who you can talk to informally. And that's a much easier way of getting into services rather than taking that brave step of coming to see someone strange like me. Okay. So we've got time for some more questions. Yep, we've got some. If you just wait for the microphone, which hopefully is coming. Oh, well then, speak away, please do.
I think it's been a really fantastic day, and we've had the most wonderful panelists this morning and this evening. But I think it's a pity that there aren't any women on the panel. And the reason for that is that there's been very little talk here or in the world about the effects of PTSD on women. I know Simon mentioned a lady that he was trying to support, but the effects are so tremendous on wives and girlfriends and children. And when you have a child saying, when Daddy was away, we were scared for him, and when he came home, we were scared of him. That's a message that really needs to be understood by everyone. So I just wondered why that is, why the effects on families and women are not openly talked about.
I think that's a really good point. I wonder whether anyone has...
As far as I'm concerned, I talk about them all the time. I've not mentioned it yet because we've been talking about our own personal experiences, but I've had to obviously go away on a lot of occasions. I've been married twice in the process as well, so I've had double the impact on two people. I've got two daughters as well who are impacted by that. I've also got a mother that's impacted by that, and I talk to them regularly. I talk to my first wife regularly about it, and we discuss how she felt. I then try and impart that knowledge to people that I work with. Jamie's married. I talked to my mum about it, and it's tough. I didn't actually realise. Obviously, everyone's always in their own world, and that's why we're here now, is to talk about it and open up about everything and normalise it, like we've all been saying. But it wasn't until I left the military. I've spoken about this probably once before. I left the military. My brother's still in the military. He's in the Royal Marines. And we used to always go away at the same time. So we'd go away on a 6-month deployment in different units, but we'd be in country at the same time in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I never knew, you're always looking at yourself and thinking, am I going to come back from this? I didn't have time to worry about my brother. He was out there and I knew he was in good hands, and you know, I was out there, he knew I was in good hands. Anyway, I leave the military and he's still in and he goes out again. And then I was actually worried for him because I wasn't wrapped up in the momentum of it all. And that's when I suddenly realised it was the first wake-up call to me, and it's because I needed to experience it, and nobody was really talking about it. I then suddenly thought about how my mum must have felt. She's got 2 sons. One of them's in the Special Forces. One of them's in the Royal Marines Commandos. She sees it on TV every day, that blokes are getting blasted, killed, shot, maimed, injured, and then coming back from it. And actually, he's suffered with mental health illness as well, but remained in the military. It was only then that I suddenly realised, you know, the impact that it had, and that's, you know, that's when I started to talk about it. I spoke about it on TV. You know, I mentioned that this needs to be, you know, explored, and these people need to be helped. And I mean, we do it as an organisation, but it's difficult because to understand it, people need to talk about it, and it's a good job that you did mention it then, so we can now talk about it. But as far as I'm concerned, it's talked about, and I explore it on a daily basis.
I was going to mention as well, I think it's a really important point. When I was working on the book, I came across a support group in Liverpool, based in Liverpool, called Combat PTSD Angels, who started off as a group of 6 women in 2011 who'd get together to talk about what they were going through in their relationships. Most of their husbands at that time were Gulf War veterans, Northern Ireland, some from the Falklands War. And since I got to know them, the group has expanded to 250 plus members on Facebook. And they're getting a whole new generation of younger women whose husbands have served in Iraq and Afghanistan and who are really struggling to cope. The good news is that actually, increasingly, I think their voices are starting to be heard, and they're starting to speak out and take the platform. I was involved in producing a radio documentary for Radio 3, which was broadcast a few weeks ago, which was based on the audio. We asked some of these women to keep audio diaries over the course of a year, where they would record their reflections on what was happening in their relationships, what the stresses they were facing. And yet, I mean, you get a very intimate sense of what it's like to be in the home environment when somebody is grappling with the fallout from such a severe psychological injury. And of course, it ripples through everyone. So I think it's great that you've raised that, because this is something that affects everyone. It's like a web. We're all touched by it. You know, some of us had grandfathers, most of us probably had grandfathers who served, and that affected our parents, and that affected us in some subtle way, or we're affected more directly. But I think the more that we can see this as a collective problem that we're all somehow affected by and can all play a role in our own individual ways in confronting, without blame, recognizing that this is an injury and that it needs to be treated, I think the better.
Great, thanks. Do you want to have a last one?
Yeah, a quick point. So we, when we meet a new client and we start working with them, it's one of the most important things we feel is to get into that family dynamic, and because this illness can go around the house, and I'm sure there's people in here that have experienced that, and so trauma there could be secondary effects on wives, girlfriends, and children, etc. And then depression, you know, some of us will know. I do, personally, I understand that depression went around my house, and I could see that my wife was affected, and my eldest son was affected, and have now all got over it in our own ways. So I think it's important that when you're setting up a coaching plan as where we're going to go, what we're going to do, is that you involve the whole family, I think so.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for that really, really insightful question as well. Well, we come, unfortunately, to the end of the time allocated for the panel, which I think you would agree has been really, really informative. Thank you so much for asking lots of questions. And I'd like to ask Professor Andrea Nolan, the principal, to come and close the session.
Well, thank you, Neil. And it's hard really to know what to say to close such a thought-provoking and what's one of the audience said compelling session. And I feel a very honest and authentic and kind of searching panel we've had. I really want to thank Neil and to Jamie and Jason and Matt and Simon for being here with us today. And I was thinking about this location, Craiglockhart campus, is the location where William Rivers, a very famous psychologist, first introduced talking cures for officers with shell shock when Craiglockhart was requisitioned, taken over as a military hospital between 1916 and 1919. And what would he think of our conversations today and of your experiences? And I hope you think, well, it may have taken them a while, but we are actually on a journey and we are moving on. I'm very proud to have hosted today event. As a university, we are a learning community, and I hope that everybody here has felt they have learned, and all our panelists and chair as well have learned from their experience of talking to people and having conversations today. As I think you mentioned, Jamie, this morning we had a presentation. Well, Jamie and Jason gave their own personal experiences, and we had one of our professors, Thanos Karatskis, talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and the complexity of that and the impact of childhood traumas. And I know I unfortunately couldn't be here this morning, but having spoken to people who were, it seems to have been an absolutely amazing session, and we've had lots of really, really positive feedback. I wanted to say a particular thanks to the staff in my own institution here at Edinburgh Napier, to Claire Bigger, Lee Dilks, Nicole Porterfield, Duncan Ferguson, and Gary Seath. And these are a group of people who, when we signed our Armed Forces Corporate Covenant last year, we signed the letter and ticked the box and said, yes, we'll do that. Lots of people do that who said, but we want to really make a difference. We want to do this really well. It's not about ticking a box. And over the last few months, they have set up outreach programs, mentoring programs, a range of support, peer mentoring for students and staff from the services, a huge range of support for families, for our local barracks. And I want to acknowledge them and ask you to think about them and thank them when we're thanking our panel members, because they've done a huge amount of work and put today together. So, thank you for your contributions, because obviously without your attendance and your questions, we couldn't have had such rich and engaging session. Thank you again to each of our panel members and to you, Neil. Thank you very much and safe journey.